Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lessons from Life. My name is Daniel Carter, and until last autumn, I never believed cursed objects or ghost stories were real. I was 34 years old and lived alone in a quiet neighborhood called Oak Ridge. It wasn't a fancy place, but it was peaceful. My little cottage sat at the end of a narrow street, surrounded by tall maple trees that turned bright orange every fall. People often asked why I lived alone. The truth was simple. After my parents died, I stopped letting people get close to me. I worked as an accountant during the day, came home every evening, cooked a simple dinner, watched television, and went to bed. Every day looked exactly like the one before it. Loneliness had quietly become part of my life. The only thing that brought me happiness was collecting old antiques. I loved objects that carried history. Old clocks, vintage paintings, rusty keys, broken pocket watches. Whenever I had free time, I visited flea markets and antique stores, hoping to discover something unique. One rainy Friday evening, after leaving work, I took a different road home. The rain was light, and the streets were nearly empty. As I walked, I noticed a tiny antique shop squeezed between two abandoned buildings. I had never seen it before. The sign above the door was faded. It simply read, "Bennett's Curiosity Shop." The front window displayed dozens of strange objects covered in dust. Old cameras, porcelain masks, wooden boxes, silver candle holders. Something about the place pulled me inside. A small bell rang as I opened the door. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with gray hair and round glasses. He looked at me for a long moment before smiling. "Looking for something special?" he asked. "I'm just browsing," I replied. The shop smelled of old wood and forgotten memories. Every shelf held something unusual. As I wandered deeper into the store, soft music suddenly filled the room. It was beautiful, slow, gentle, almost sad. I followed the melody until I found its source. On the highest shelf sat a small wooden music box. It was carved with tiny roses and birds. Although dust covered it, the craftsmanship was incredible. When I touched it, the music stopped immediately. A strange chill ran down my spine. The old shopkeeper appeared beside me without making a sound. "You like that one?" he said quietly. "It's beautiful." His smile disappeared. "It has been here for many years. No one buys it? They always bring it back." I laughed nervously. "What do you mean?" He stared directly into my eyes. "They say strange things happen after they take it home." I smiled. "I'm not superstitious." He didn't smile back. Most people aren't until they become frightened. For a moment, I considered putting the music box back. But curiosity won. "How much?" The old man hesitated. $30. It was surprisingly cheap. I paid without another question. As he wrapped the music box in brown paper, he whispered something so softly I almost didn't hear it. "If it starts playing by itself," he paused, "don't open it after midnight." I frowned. "What?" But he had already turned away. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets were silent. As I walked home carrying the package, I couldn't stop thinking about the strange warning. I told myself it was only a clever trick to make the shop seem mysterious, nothing more. When I reached home, I placed the music box on the living room shelf. I wound the tiny key. A soft melody filled the room. It sounded peaceful, almost comforting. For the first time in months, my empty house didn't feel so lonely. I smiled. Maybe buying it had been a good decision after all. That night I cooked dinner, watched an old movie, and forgot about the warning. Around midnight I woke suddenly. Someone or something was playing music downstairs. At first I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard it again. The exact same melody. Slow, gentle, beautiful. My bedroom door was open. The hallway beyond was completely dark. I looked at the clock beside my bed. 12:17 a.m. My heart started beating faster. I knew I had never wound the music box before going to sleep. Slowly, I walked downstairs. Each wooden step creaked beneath my feet. The music became louder. When I reached the living room, I froze. The music box was open. Its tiny ballerina was spinning by itself. No one was there. No wind, no movement. Just the haunting melody filling the silent house. Trying to stay calm, I walked over and closed the lid. The music stopped instantly. I let out a nervous laugh. It must have been faulty. That had to be the explanation. I returned upstairs, but before I reached my bedroom, the music started again. This time, it was coming from directly behind me. The music started again. This time, it was coming from directly behind me. I slowly turned around. The living room was empty. No one was standing there. But the music box was open again. The tiny ballerina spun in slow circles, even though I clearly remembered closing the lid only seconds earlier. A cold feeling spread through my body. I walked toward it once more. The music suddenly stopped by itself. I picked up the music box. It felt strangely warm, almost as if someone had been holding it. I carried it into the kitchen and locked it inside a cabinet. "This should solve it," I whispered. Then I forced myself to go back to bed. The next morning, I convinced myself I had simply been tired. People imagine strange things. When they don't get enough sleep. That had to be it. After breakfast, I left for work. The entire day, I couldn't stop thinking about the music box. By evening, I was exhausted. When I unlocked my front door, something immediately felt wrong. The lights were already on. I was certain I had turned them off before leaving. Slowly, I walked inside. Nothing seemed missing. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. The music box was no longer inside the kitchen cabinet. It sat perfectly in the middle of my dining table. The lid was closed. I stood there in complete silence. I knew I hadn't moved it. Someone had entered my house. I quickly checked every room. Every window was locked. The back door was still bolted. Nothing had been stolen. It made no sense. That night, I decided to install a small security camera in the living room. If someone's playing tricks on me, I thought, I'll finally have proof. Before going to bed, I placed the music box on the coffee table directly in front of the camera. Then, I unplugged it, just to be safe. Around 3 in the morning, the music woke me again. I rushed downstairs. The melody echoed through the house. The music box was playing, but it was still unplugged. My hands trembled as I switched on the lights. Everything stopped. The next morning, I immediately checked the camera recording. At first, nothing happened. Hours passed quietly. Then, exactly at 3:03 a.m., the room suddenly became darker. Not because someone turned off the lights. It was as though a shadow slowly filled the room. The music box opened by itself. The ballerina began spinning. Then something appeared behind it. A dark figure. Tall. Thin. Its face couldn't be seen. It simply stood there, watching the camera. Then, without moving its feet, it slowly turned its head, directly toward the left. The screen suddenly filled with static. The recording ended. I nearly dropped my laptop. That afternoon, I drove back to Bennett's Curiosity Shop. But when I reached the street, the shop was gone. In its place stood an empty building, covered with broken windows and weeds. Confused, I walked into the nearby bakery. "Excuse me," I asked the woman behind the counter. "What happened to the antique shop next door?" She looked puzzled. "What antique shop?" "The one owned by Mr. Bennett." She frowned. "That building has been abandoned for over 20 years. A chill ran through my body. "That's impossible. I bought something there yesterday." The woman slowly shook her head. "No one has lived there for decades." I hurried outside. My hands were shaking. Had I imagined everything? No. The music box was still in my house. That night, I searched the internet for any information about Bennett's Curiosity Shop. After hours of searching, I found an old newspaper article. The headline read, "Antique Shop Destroyed by Fire. Owner Dies Saving Customers." The article was 23 years old. The owner's name, Henry Bennett, the same name written on the faded shop sign. According to the article, firefighters never found one item after the fire: a handcrafted wooden music box. My heart pounded. The picture beside the article showed the exact same music box sitting on a shelf. There was no doubt. I had bought something that should have disappeared decades ago. I knew I couldn't keep it. The following morning, I drove to the largest lake outside the city. Standing at the edge of the water, I took one final look at the music box. The tiny ballerina wasn't moving. Everything was silent. "I'm ending this," I whispered. I threw it as hard as I could. The box disappeared beneath the dark water. For the first time in days, I felt relief. That night, I slept peacefully. No music, no shadows, no nightmares. Days became weeks. Life slowly returned to normal. I almost convinced myself everything had finally ended. Then one Saturday afternoon, a package arrived at my front door. There was no return address. Inside was a small wooden box wrapped in old brown paper. My stomach tightened. Slowly, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. It read, "Some things are never meant to be thrown away." Beneath the note rested the same wooden music box, only this time the tiny ballerina wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a second tiny figure. It looked exactly like me. The lid slowly opened by itself, and the music began to play.